So you're in the HTML5 for ASP.NET 4 and 4.5 talk of aspConf. First off, I want to thank everyone for attending aspConf, especially all the folks that put all this together. They deserve a big hand. I know it was a lot of work for them. I know they were up late last night trying to get everything, make sure everything was just ready to go, and everything, was the best experience for all the attendees. So this is super awesome, especially since it's free. I have no idea how these guys pull it off, but they do a great job. So I really appreciate those guys. And it's really a pleasure for me to be able to present here. And then last piece of logistics is the keynote is right after this. So we'll go ahead and try to finish up roughly on time so you guys can go ahead and, bathroom break, grab a snack or something, and then get ready for the Guthrie keynote. Because I know he's way more important than I am, so you guys probably all want to hear him versus me. So let's go ahead and get started. Like I said, you're in the HTML5 for ASP.NET 4 and 4.5 talk. My name is Matthew Osborne. A little bit about myself. I've been at Microsoft for just about 4 years now. I actually just had my 4-year anniversary with the company in June. Prior to that, I worked at a very small startup, and prior to that, I was in school. So I do have a little bit of industry experience, which is where a lot of this knowledge comes from, working in a small startup and being the one guy that was in charge of websites. So at Microsoft, I work on the Azure Applications and Platform team. It's kind of a mouthful to say, but basically I work under Scott Guthrie. So Guthrie basically owns everything down. There's probably 10-12 levels of people in between me and Guthrie, so I'm not even remotely important. But I'm there. I have worked on everything from MVC, web pages, web forms, new project templates. I worked on NuGet quite a bit, and this is a sheer ploy. I do have a NuGet talk later this afternoon. Hopefully everyone can attend. We'll show off some stuff that I don't know has been demoed a whole lot, some stuff that people might not even know about. Some new features that we added, and we'll talk a little bit about also what's coming up in the next version of NuGet as well. So, highly recommend coming to that talk as well. Also, right now, I currently work on the Azure portal. So, if any of you have seen the new HTML5 single-page application version of the portal, we previewed that, released that a few months ago. I'm actually working on the team that works on that right now as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. So the first off, what a lot of HTML5 talks don't cover is the why. They talk a lot about the what and the when and all the rest of the W's except for the why. I think it's important to stop and consider the why beyond just the fact that some marketing folks told you that it was better to create an HTML5 site because, hey, they could go ahead and market it easier. Everyone wants an HTML5 site. You kind of need to know the why. So that's really important to me. That's kind of my little soapbox. So I always like to, at the beginning of this talk, go through the why. And you can't really talk about the why without really talking about the what. So we're going to first start off with the what. So what is it? First off, HTML5, particularly in the context of this talk, is considered to kind of be an umbrella term. And what I mean by that is that it covers several different things. It covers the HTML5 standard, it covers the CSS3 standard, and it covers some of the new stuff that's coming out with JavaScript, ECMAScript 5. So it's kind of a broad term that is a blanket term, and I think it's used mainly because saying HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript is kind of a mouthful, so it's easier just to shorten it down to HTML5. But you should understand that they are separate specs. They can be implemented separately, and particularly when you get down talking about the CSS3 spec, it's kind of been implemented in a module level where you have very small specs that define one particular behavior. So it's kind of a blanket term. So keep that in mind throughout this whole talk. But what is it? I like to say that it's a new standard for a new web. So what do I mean by that? Well, when I was younger, I had AOL. Probably many of you had AOL. That was the internet to me. I understood AOL. I know I clicked on the little AOL. And for those that don't know, AOL is America Online. It was one of the larger dial-up internet providers in the United States for a while. And I clicked on the little America Online program. It opened up. It gave me kind of a self-contained experience of the internet. I had these keywords that I could type in and navigate around. You didn't really necessarily even have to have a web URL. Like we have Twitter hashtags now. Back in the day, all the commercials used to have, hey, AOL keyword, blah, and that's how you would go find the site. And, right, so we have progressed really far. I could have never imagined that when I first got dial-up in my house that I would have been able to be on a plane over 10,000 feet and stream every single second of the Olympic Games that's going on, right? The London Olympics are coming up, and you'll be able to watch everything, period. There's nothing you will miss. If it's being filmed, it will be streamed online, and that's crazy, right? That's really a complete, almost 180 from where we were at. Like, just the sheer technology behind it, you never would have imagined that back in the day. But the problem is that all of this stuff was really kind of achieved on a standard that was written back when AOL was created and popular, right? So think about that. You had this standard that was designed to kind of support an AOL-type workflow, but now it has been bent and molded, and plugins have been added, and this and that, to be able to kind of achieve these new experiences. Well, that's where a new standard came in. So this was realized that, hey, these standards are really out of date. There's all kinds of crazy things that we're going to need to do. We need to go ahead and update this standard to kind of support the next level of things, right? Because we're kind of at the brink about all we can do with the old standard. So, and when I say the old standard, I mean CSS 2.1, HTML4, those types of things. So we're really kind of right at the brink of what we can do with that. So HTML5, keeping in mind that means HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript, is really a new standard for a new web, right? It's where we're going. So I like to talk, now that you understand it's a new standard, so what is a standard? What do these things make up? Well, first off, this makes up kind of three groups of things, and I like to talk about them that way. So the first is kind of just the pure elements. Right, so you have things like the header tag, the footer tag, the nav. You have those things, which are just kind of pure elements, right? If you wanted to look at it from a CSS3 perspective, it would be pure things just like new selectors, right? So that's pure kind of the base level. And then you have things that add a whole new level of functionality. And what I mean by that are things like keyframes in CSS, where you can define an animation, pure functionality such as storage, or the caching API, or even WebSockets, right? That is kind of pure functionality that is defined in these standards. And then there's the third group, which is kind of a mix of both pure element and functionality. So those are things, you can kind of think of those things as maybe like the video and the audio tag. And we can go further into those, or even think about the new input types, things like a date picker, right? Eventually browsers are going to support having a date picker, right? So that's kind of an element, but it's also a new piece of functionality where it gives kind of a new user experience. So that's kind of the three things that make up this new standard for the new web. So now that we've talked about the what, we can really get to the why, right? Maybe I should move that why slide to here, but we can really talk about the why. And the why is something I like to call the 3 S's. And the 3 S's are smaller, simpler, and semantic, right? So you care about these things. You care about the what because they're going to make the code you write smaller, right? And then it's going to make the code you write simpler. And then it's going to make the code you write more semantic, right? So to kind of give you an idea of what these three mean, let's kind of run through them. I have slides for each. So for the first S, smaller. So on the left side of the screen here, you have an example of what it used to take to create rounded corners. Okay, this is kind of a fairly common practice, especially in Web 2.0. Everything in Web 2.0 had to have rounded corners. It was, you know, the stuff. Web 2.0 was rounded corners. If you had rounded corners, you could say your website was 2.0. Now it's kind of the opposite with Metro. Now everything's square and round and overflowy. But back in the day, Web 2.0, rounded corners. This is a very common scenario. So you can kind of look, if we just kind of run down the page, you really don't need to be able to read the text. If you're looking at this video later and the text is too small, don't really worry about the text that's in the big bar. Just notice that one bar is really tall and one bar is really short. But basically what we're doing here is really the only way to achieve this was you would actually have to add 4 extra elements into your markup. One for the top left, one for the top right, bottom left, bottom right, and then you would actually just set a background image. And that background image was something that you had sliced up or one of your designers had sliced up. It was effectively just the rounded corner with the background color of the content you wanted and then the background color of what was behind it. So you displayed an image that kind of faked out the rounded corner. This was great. It worked pretty well. The problem was that when you did this, if you wanted to go change the background color of the content or something, you had to regenerate all these new images. You had to worry about these images being cached and it looking funky if somebody, you know, got the top left cached and it was a blue background and the rest were red background. Like, it became very difficult to kind of maintain. And you can look at it. It's about 44 lines of code to go ahead and achieve this, right? And we're not even talking about complexity. On the right side of your screen, you have what it was like, what it's like now to go ahead and write rounded corners. This is about 9 lines of code. I could have shortened it up a little bit more because I could have put the text of the paragraph on the same line like I did on the one on the left. But I wanted to go ahead and give it, you know, a little bit more. Otherwise, it would have been just ridiculously too small to show. You know, so I could have chopped off 2 lines. It could have been 7 lines. But basically, it's just border radius equals, you know, 10 pixels. This is leaving off something called vendor prefixing, and we'll talk about that later. But this is the gist of what it would take, right? So 44 lines compared to 9 lines. That's, you know, pretty good improvement. So I really think it makes your code a lot smaller. So let's talk about the second S now, which is simpler, right? So if we look at this, on the left side of the screen, we have the old way of doing it again. So we have what we're trying to achieve here is a watermark. For those that don't know, watermark is basically when you have a text box and it has some kind of text, like, you know, enter first name here, and then you click on it, the text goes away, you type in something, you tab out, your stuff still stays, right? Kind of a nice user experience where you can, you know, kind of clue in your users on what they should or shouldn't be typing in each text box. You know, sometimes it reduces space that you need for things. So in this particular example, I'm taking the inputs. I'm going through each one of the inputs and I'm looking at the title. So you can define a title on an input, and I'm going ahead and sticking that title in the value of the text box. And then I'm setting this placeholder class. And what that allows me to do is kind of apply a gray color to the value of the text box so that it looks more like a watermark. It looks like it's, you know, it's not the actual value of the text box. And then when the text box becomes in focus, I'm comparing the value to the title. And if the value is the title, I go ahead and clear that out because the user hasn't typed anything, and I remove the placeholder class so that it looks like a regular input. And then when you tab out, or the onBlur function of the text box, I compare it, the value. If you haven't entered anything, then I go ahead and stick the title back into the value, and then I also go apply the class. But if you haven't, if you've entered something, then I don't do anything, right? I don't want to clear out your data. So if we do that and kind of run through it, it's about roughly 5 paths worth of logic, right? Well, in HTML5, I can simply put this placeholder equals value, right? That's one path. You could argue that that's 0 paths because it's just the rendering, right? So it went from, you know, 5 levels of complexity to no levels of complexity. And this is the last thing you want to screw up, right? You don't want a user entering a bunch of information in their site, and as soon as they tab out, they're left, right? Like, that's one of the worst things you could do to a user. So This is taking all that logic that you might previously have to maintain and shipping it off to the browser and allowing the browser to just handle it, right? So that's the second S. That's how you can make it more simple. The third S is how you can make it more semantic. So we'll talk about the semantics, and then we'll talk about why semantic is important here in a second. First, at the top of the page, we have a question. Let me see if I can grab this question. Can we say due to smaller CSS, HTML5, or HTML and JavaScript code, HTML5 pages are more performant? You could possibly say that they're more performant. It's definitely less information that you're sending down the wire, obviously, if it's smaller. And then also, if you have less JavaScript that you're running on the page, the JavaScript is obviously going to be less code running on the page is obviously going to mean that the page is easier. So if someone, the moderator wouldn't mind go ahead and marking that question as answered for me, that would be great. Unless I didn't answer it, then ask a follow-up. So the third S is semantic. And so you can see here that this is kind of a default layout of a site. It's a very simple kind of example that I would use here. It's not really too fancy, but you have a header, some navigation, then you have a body, you have some ads, and then you have the footer, right? And in here you can see I'm kind of mixing whether I'm using a class or an ID to kind of define the header or navigation. And then you can see down at the bottom I have a post with some content inside of it, but this really isn't saying much. This post could really be self-contained. It could be something that could be pulled out of the website by itself and read alone without needing to be inside the website. And then lastly is the ads. Obviously I want to make some money on my site, so the first thing I want to do is try to put some ads on there. And you can see that I'm just using a div here for the ads, and it's really not related. So this is kind of the old way of doing things. So if we look at the semantic way of doing things, so this would be with HTML5, you can see here that I now have a header and footer tag, right? I'm no longer mixing whether I'm using an ID or a class to define these things. That's kind of very common as you look across websites, right? There's not normally a very good standard of whether I'm going to use ID or whether I'm going to use class, right? So it's really hard to kind of automate that process, right? Think about a screen reader that might want to come along and find the header of the page or the navigation of the page to go ahead and read that. How does it do that, right? It didn't know to look at classes or IDs. There was no kind of standard way of defining it. In this case, hey, it can look for a nav tag and understand that that's the navigation of the page. In this section, for the content, the blog post, if you will, I went ahead and made that an article. So an article is, if you read the spec, it's really a standalone piece of content. This is another one of my small soapboxes. I often see people just go ahead and start placing article everywhere that they put a paragraph or a div tag. Well, that's not really true. So an article is a self-contained piece of the site that could be pulled out. So think about a newspaper, right? An article in a newspaper could be clipped out of that newspaper and hung on the wall, and it would really make sense, right? You didn't really need to know any other information about it. And if you have used an iPhone or seen an iPhone, they often in the new version of Safari, they have a nice little reader mode where you can click and it pops up just the text on the page and gives you just a black and white kind of comparison. It makes it really nice for reading news articles. And how those things work is they look for article tags and just pull those out, right? Because that's the idea. It's self-contained. You can pull those out. You don't need to show all the Chrome and flashy stuff around the outside of the article, and you can really focus on the content. And then lastly is I have the aside for the ads. And the aside is basically, once again, following the print analogy, the aside is content that's not necessarily related to the main content. So an ad is not really related to your content. So this makes it easier if let's say a search engine was to come through and look at your site. They would understand that this content is not really meant to be related to this article, right? Even though they're sisters in the DOM, it's not really related. It's meant to be an ad, right? So when you make your markup more semantic by doing these types of things, This allows more information to be added into the document. The more information that can be added into the document, the less information, the less work that goes into reading the document. And what I mean by that is, like I said, a screen reader now knows where to go. It doesn't have to contextually search the whole document to try to figure out where things are. Articles can be pulled out by themselves. So, read it later, those types of services can look at just articles and pull those out. You don't need any special plugin or anything like that. That just kind of works. And you don't have to worry about all of a sudden these ads being related to your content and search engines, those types of things. So it really helps reduce the amount of work that you do. So if you look at these three S's, it really does make your markup smaller, it makes it simpler, and it makes it more semantic. So that's really why you should care about this HTML5 stuff instead of just kind of assuming it was the right way to do. So hopefully you've learned a little bit about why you should care. So that is the end of my slides. Hopefully you didn't get too scared away thinking I was going to talk only about slides today. I'm actually going to show some demos here, and we're going to go through those. So I have a very simple podcast website here. It's nothing too fancy. You have your main podcast, episode 10, you can kind of give the description, showing, and we have a download link, and you can kind of click through the archive of other ones. It just picks the most recent, puts it up here in blue, makes it kind of nice and fancy, right? So the first thing I want to do is, this is an HTML5 demo, so first thing I need to do is go and make it HTML5. I'm going to go ahead and make this doc type HTML5, and this is the nice thing about HTML5 is it has a very short doc type. I don't know about anyone else, but I can never remember what the doc types for anything else were. I'd always end up having to go and look those up if I needed to insert them into the document for whatever reason if I was writing them. So this is really nice that this is, the doc type. Okay, so I've got a header here. I'm going to go ahead and change this header, right? So that was pretty simple. I've got this menu here, which is probably the navigation, so I'm going to go ahead and mark that as navigation. Let's go ahead and change the footer as well. Obviously the footer is something that we want to make a footer. That was pretty easy to call out. I named them pretty simple so I could find them later in the document. Go ahead and open up index here. Let's see, what else do I need to do here? Well, this is the featured part. That's the blue part. So I want to add a little bit more semantics than just saying a div. A div is just kind of a generic container. I want to add a little bit more semantic to that and say that it's actually a section of the site. So it's kind of a self-contained, nice grouping. And that also means when I add a section that I can restart the numbering of the H1 tags. If you didn't know, you should only have one H1 per page. You can have as many H2s, H3s, all the way to H6s as you want, but you should only have one. So then you can see here I'm kind of doing this title-subtitle relationship with an H1 and an H2. Well, there's a tag for that. We can go ahead and come in here and put in an H group. And I do have a pet peeve around H groups. So a lot of people will just try to throw in an H group anywhere that they kind of want. Anytime where they have these two tags next to each other, they'll throw in an H group. What an H group is really saying that these two heading tags are related to each other, right? So don't just surround it by an H group unless they're actually contextually related to each other. In this case, I knew I wanted the title-subtitle relationship, so I wanted to go ahead and add them. And H group is two and only two, no more, no less, heading tags. So you have to have two. You can't have three, you can't have one. So you want to go ahead and do that. And I think we're just about set. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure I have everything saved. I'm going to go ahead and build. And go ahead and run. Okay, so I went ahead and ran this site. You can see that it works basically just the same. Looks just the same. So I'm going to go ahead and press F12. And for those that didn't know, F12 opens the IE developer toolbar. This is super handy because it kind of gives you a representation of the DOM. You can mess with CSS classes, you can debug JavaScript through here. And what I like about it is it actually allows me to change the document mode. So I can go back and go all the way back to IE7 rendering engine and go ahead and use those different rendering engines. Now, if you're a tester and you're listening to this talk, these different rendering engines aren't 100% what it was like to use IE7. Putting it in Quarks mode is very similar to using IE6, but it's not. So be careful. This just basically changes the rendering engine to the old rendering engine. Don't use this as your de facto testing tool for your website. If you absolutely have to support IE7, you should absolutely have a box with IE7 installed. It's not that hard to set up. You can set up a virtual machine and run it pretty quickly, but I highly recommend it. But I'm going to go ahead and run this in IE7 mode. Right? So this is kind of what it's like to do these types of things and then now have to support these old things. So this is kind of the first problem that we're going to run into when we talk about using HTML5, is that it's a new spec. If we kind of pause for a second, this spec isn't supposed to be ratified until like 2020 or something like that. Like, so many years out. Everything is still pretty relatively new, and things are changing as you go along. Right, so a lot of browsers, a lot of old browsers don't know about these types of things. So what I'm going to spend the next few minutes here talking to you is how you can use the benefits of HTML5, but still be able to support older browsers like IE6, 7, 8, those types of things. In this particular demo, I can really only show you back to IE7 with these developer tools. And so let's now talk a little bit about why this site all of a sudden just didn't work when I really only changed a couple things. I only added tags. I'm not even adding any new functionality, right? So I did the simplest of the 3 types of things in the standard. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to use this. If you click on this little cursor, it allows you to inspect elements. So in here, this area right here is where it used to be blue. So you can see in the DOM Explorer here that I have my section there. It's there, but all of a sudden it became self-closing. So did this age group, so did this age group. And if I go around, all the tags that I just went and changed ended up being these self-closing tags. So what in the world's going on here? Well, older browsers had a list of elements that they understood how to render. And this was kind of a performance optimization, let's say, right? So if it ran across something that wasn't in its list of known elements, and those known elements were generated off of things like the HTML4 spec, it would say, okay, I don't know what to do with these. I'm going to mark it as a self-closing tag so that I don't have to worry about it. So when you mark it as self-closing, there's no content. It's just in the DOM. Just goes away. Right? I'm just going to mark each one of these things that I don't know about as self-closing. They don't have to worry about them. I can just go ahead and render the rest of the page. So that's actually what's going on here. So how do we work around this particular issue? Well, there's some very smart people out there that figured this out. So I'm going to go ahead and open this demo.js. This is just something that I already just have wired up in my layout right here. It's nothing fancy. It's just, empty. There's no nothing up the sleeve here. So you're going to see me copy out of my snippets notepad here a few times, so forgive that. I have this demo.js file. So what people have figured out is that if you were in an older browser and you said document.createElement, that element that you created would then be added to the list of known things, right? So if I do something like this, where I'm running through and I'm doing document.createElement on header, section, nav, I don't even have to assign them to anything. I'm just creating them and letting them go away. They'll eventually be cleaned up. I'm just doing this very simple thing. I can go ahead and effectively trick the browser into adding this into the list of known things it knows how to render. So the important thing to note here is I have that this demo.js file is included at the top of the document, So often you see a recommendation is to put your scripts at the bottom. This particular script needs to be included at the top, and it needs to execute immediately. You can have probably seen the scenario of putting a function, up here, kind of wrapping your all your code, and you would put it in something like this. This is jQuery style, and it immediately executes this function once the page is loaded. I don't want that to happen, because once the page is loaded, everything's already been rendered. I want this to happen before it hits anything else in the page. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. Make sure I saved it. I'm going to run back to the site here. I'm still going to be running in IE7 mode, and I'm going to run, and if the demo gods be with me, you can see that we're getting there. But it still actually kind of looks bad. I actually prefer the other way that it looked more than what it looks now, right? It looked mildly okay. It just looked like it was missing styling before. Now it just looks broken. It looks like something's wrong. So what could be going on here? Well, I'm going to go ahead and go back and do my inspection tool here. So you can see that we have everything setting up, and we've got our styles applied, and they're now being rendered as true DOM elements. They're not just being marked as self-closing, so we've got that working. But why does it still look all weird? Well, the main reason for that is that all my styling that I have, that I've previously added to the site, has been based on the default behaviors of the elements. So by that I mean whether it's display inline, display block, those types of things. For those that don't know, display inline are things like spans, display block are things like div. It just kind of defines some default behaviors. And things like the header and footer and section, those are display block. However, when you do this document.create trick, what you end up doing is the browser just treats them as inline. It doesn't know about the default styles. And that's because browsers render based on, they basically have their own style sheet that they use behind the background that's applied first with all the default styles. And since it didn't know about any of these things, that default style is the default, which is inline for those browsers. So I can quickly fix that by coming in here and adding header, navigation, section, age group, footer to the display block. And reset those. So if I come into the website and now I go ahead and refresh, you can see that I'm basically back to the layout that I was at before. Pretty simple. You can see, everything looks good. My section display block is being applied, and we're looking pretty good. So I can actually kind of switch to the IE9 mode, and you can tell that it's basically the same. You might notice a few small differences between IE 6, 7, 8, particularly IE6, because there's different ways that it treats padding. But you can kind of fiddle around with those knowing to get it. But it basically looks good enough. So I really haven't had to do a ton of work to make this happen, to be able to use these new elements immediately, right? Like I could go back to my company and start using these right now. But I can make that even simpler for you. So I can go ahead and remove all of this JavaScript. I don't need that anymore. And I'm going to come back, and I'm going to include a library. And this library is called Modernizer. Let me just make sure I type this correctly. I probably should have had a snippet for that, right? So I can get Modernizer by going to NuGet. I'm going to right-click on my project, click Manage NuGet Packages. If I go in it installed, it should show up here in just a second. You can see I have Modernizer installed right here. Like I said earlier, I'm giving a talk on NuGet later today, so if you're not familiar with what NuGet is, please show up. It will change your life. So I've got Modernizer installed already. So all I did was add it to the top of the page here. I don't have anything in demo. I cleared everything out, so no tricks there. And once again, like I said, with demo.js, this needs to be one of the first things that's on the page, so you can't move this to the bottom of the page, just simply because you're trying to fix the rendering. So it has to be the first thing on the top of the page. So I've saved everything. I'm going to Control F5 just to make sure that I clear out the cache so you guys know that I'm not doing anything here. I'm going to switch it to IE7. You can see, I got rid of my JavaScript and I'm using a library to help fix that up. So let's go ahead and move to the next thing. So we've kind of talked about some functionality. Let's go ahead and add something else that's more interesting. This is a podcast player, and all I have on the site is, or a podcast website, and all I really have is a download episode link, right? That's not very cool, right? Most podcast websites, you're going to probably just want to listen to it. You're probably going to want to just stream it from their site, right? So to the rescue comes the audio tag. So I'm just going to come in here. I'm going to copy this since I'm going to use the same source. And in here, I'm going to create an audio tag. I'm going to give it an ID of episode, let's say. I'm going to give it a source, and I'm just giving it an ID so we can find it later. It makes it a little bit easier. So I'm going to give it the source, and then I'm going to say controls equals controls. Now what that does is it tells the browser to go ahead and render the play, pause, timeline buttons. Right? You could have an audio tag that was hidden, but we want to go ahead and allow you to play, pause, and control it yourself. And the reason why I put controls equals controls is, in this particular case, I didn't actually need it. Fun fact, HTML5, you can have things called marker attributes. So you can just put controls on the attribute, and it would be just fine. But however, at any time, if I wanted to change this to XHTML5, which means that it's valid HTML5, but then it's also valid XML, which means that you could use an XML parser on it. Every attribute has to have a value in XML. There's no such thing as marker attributes, so that's why I went ahead and put equals controls on there. Just in case I ever change my mind, I want to go ahead and use an XML parser. I want to make it valid XHTML5. I don't have to worry about all these particular things. I think it's just a pretty good habit to get into to go ahead and include those things. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save this. I'm going to come back here. Let me go ahead and switch to IE9 mode. We're going to run the site here. And you can see here that I've got a nice little player. I've got the volume, play, pause button. I can, T-20. I can play it there. You get the idea. So that's great. But what happens if I come to the site in IE7 mode? Right? Nothing. Nothing really happens. This is good, but I think we could do a better job, right? Maybe I told my friend, hey, go to this website and stream this podcast. He goes to it and says, hey, there's no streaming thing. What are you talking about? It's kind of confusing. Then you kind of have to, you might have to maintain an FAQ about, why you can't stream, that kind of thing, right? You don't even have a notification that there is a possibility of streaming if you were to upgrade your browser, right? So we can actually fix that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just, inside the audio tag, I'm going to put please upgrade your browser, right? And then I'm going to go ahead and run the same site, provided I saved it. You can now see that I'm actually seeing that text. So what does that mean? If you remember, I told you that when we did the document.creates, it just kind of creates a node and kind of ignores it. Well, Modernizer has created that node for us, but it's just sitting here and it doesn't recognize anything. It understands that this is some type of node that could have some content, and this content could be anything. It could be HTML. I could have put more HTML on here with, a link to instructions on how to upgrade your browser, those types of things, right? So this is one way that you could kind of support the down-level experience, which is notifying the user that they're actually missing out on some functionality of your site because they're using an older browser. That's not probably the greatest way to do it, if you think about it, because from a user experience point of view, you're basically telling the user that they've done something wrong immediately when they visited your site, right? That kind of sucks. So we can take that one step further. So I'm going to go ahead and actually clear this out. Inside of this demo.js, I'm going to come in and, ooh, that's not the one I wanted. I wanted to grab this, and I'm going to grab some stuff here. And I'm just going to paste this in, and then we're going to talk about it. Okay, so I pasted in some JavaScript. What I have here is a function that will execute immediately once the page is loaded. So I'm using this modernizer object. What in the world is this modernizer object? Right? So not only will modernizer kind of fix up the markup, it does those document.create for you, it also does a bunch of tests against the browser. It asks the browser a bunch of questions. So if I do modernizer dot, you can see here that it gives me basically a giant list of things. And this giant list of things would be whether it supports the audio tag, right? So it's doing a lot of querying against the browser. So you can see here I can access it this way, and then I could go one step further and say, you know, if you can play audio, what formats could you play, right? Because these are the three supposedly supported ones, but for whatever reason, a particular, maybe a mobile browser only supports MP3. So you could go one step further and say if it supports audio and it supports MP3, you could do a different behavior. So you can see here I'm testing and saying if Modernizer does not support the audio tag, right? So if it doesn't support the audio tag, I'm going to do some stuff. Now what I'm doing here is just something very simple. I'm just executing, I'm grabbing this audioplayer.js file, and I'm setting some stuff up. Now what this is basically the WordPress audio player standalone version, and I've just already included that in my content folder here, and the JS file is already included over here. I just did that so I could save some time. It's nothing fancy. I just went ahead and downloaded the standalone version. So I'm going ahead and loading that script up dynamically, and then I'm setting up the audio player. And then what I'm doing is I'm saying, go find me all the audio tags on the page, and for each one of those, I'm going to embed the audio, this audio player, right? And I'm sending the sound file, and I'm reading in the source of that audio tag, right? So if I go ahead and save this, and I come back to the website, keep in mind I'm still in IE7 mode. I'm going to go ahead and run this. And you can now see that I've got the WordPress standalone audio player actually in place in IE7. You can see here, this is a good point. A lot of people don't know this. So I've actually, after the page has rendered, I've used JavaScript to modify the source of the page. This down here is synced to when the page very first loads. You can click this little refresh button, and that will actually update its representation of the DOM. So that's why I couldn't actually click on that before. So you can see here that now, in place of that audio tag, I've actually embedded an object, which is the Flash player, right? But if I go ahead and switch back to IE9, you can see that I get the HTML5 audio tag running, right? And I also wanted to take this time to point out, so I told you that Modernizer will query the browser and ask it what it is capable of doing. And you can access that through a nicely wrapped up JavaScript object, but you can also access that through the class object on HTML. So it goes ahead and puts a bunch of classes on the HTML, which makes it a little bit easier for you to select. You can see things like JS. So it supports JavaScript, but it doesn't support Flexbox. It doesn't support the legacy Flexbox. It supports Canvas, Canvas Text. It doesn't support WebGL. It's not a touch browser. Geolocation is enabled. I can do post messaging. So you can see here that it's asking a lot of questions, and then you could imagine that you could style your site using that as well. So between the combination of the JavaScript and the styles, you could really provide a nice kind of up-level experience, or for that matter, maybe a better down-level experience if certain things weren't supported. So the other thing I want to point out is, while I've done all this, and this was a fairly simple amount of JavaScript code to write myself, there's other libraries out there just like Modernizer that will do this for you. Plenty of people have had to do these types of things before. There's one that I particularly like to recommend called Media Element JS, and that will work with both audio and video as well. This particular sample is only for the audio tag. So that's a really good option that kind of, once again, along the theme of making the amount of markup that you have to write simpler. So the next thing I want to do is, this is a great website thus far, but something that would be nice to have is allow a person maybe in their car to be on their mobile device and hit this website, be able to start streaming, but then maybe they go out of range. So maybe they're driving through Wyoming or Nebraska or Kansas, one of the flyover states. They want to go ahead and be able to still do it while they don't have cell phone signal. I still want to be able to listen to your podcast. So that would be something that would be really cool to have. Well, luckily, HTML5 kind of supports a scenario that allows us to pull this off. So the first thing I'm going to do is, this is an MVC site. If you don't know MVC, you don't need to worry about I could do this in web forms, I could do it in web pages, I could do it in pure HTML. I've just chose MVC because I worked on the MVC team, so it's just something that I'm most familiar with. So I'm going to add a controller here. And that's a good punish. I should have called that out beforehand, that this will work with any of our web technologies. It's not just specific to MVC, even though every kind of example I've been showing you has been in MVC. We'll work with any of our web technologies. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and create this, and I'm going to call it the castManifest controller. I'm just going to create it as an empty controller because I've already got the code here for me. So let me just go ahead and copy this out real quick, if you don't mind. Okay, so I'm going to paste this in here. I've already got it defined, and I need to add a using statement. Okay, so what am I doing here? It's pretty simple. I have, you know, the controller, and then I have the action here that I'm going to create. I'm giving it a content type of cache manifest. And basically what I'm doing here is building up a cache manifest file. And I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. So I've gone ahead and saved this controller. I'm going to go ahead and build the site. I often forget to build, and sometimes that's unfortunate. Apparently, I don't know why that browser decided it wasn't going to do. So I'm just going to go to cache manifest/index. Oh, I'm sorry. So this is a common problem that I've run into before. I'm actually going to open this up in Chrome and run it in Chrome. And that's mainly because Chrome will just display the text for me. It doesn't ask me to download it. Actually, I have this right here. So I can control F5 just so you can believe me, even though I have the URL. So what this file is just a very simple file. And it gives me a version. So this is the revision number that I can build off of. And then I've got a whole bunch of URLs here. And that's what I've kind of dynamically built up, right? And what this does is it tells the browser, hey, this is a list of things that you need to go ahead and go through and cache, right? So really the most important part is you don't have to have a revision number, but the first thing you have to have is, you know, first rule of cache manifest is the first line has to be cache manifest, and then just a bunch of URLs for the browser to cache. So how do I go ahead and wire this up? Well, I have the code here. So really the only thing you need to do is come into your layout, and there's an attribute on the HTML tag that you add, right? Cache manifest, which says this is where you add it. So if I go ahead and come back here, and I'm just going to go to the main site. Let me just make sure I've got everything running and save. Oop, I actually want to hit the site. I don't want to refresh that page. Okay. So I'm going to go to my web server here, and I'm actually going to completely stop the web server, and I'm going to come and click around inside the site. So you can see that I'm still navigating around the site, even though the page, the web server is completely stopped. Currently this works in Chrome, so if I try to do the same thing in IE, you know, I'm going to get nowhere. It doesn't work in IE. So we can kind of fix that. So what we could do is maybe we wanted to notify users whether they could use the cache manifest or not, right? So a very just simple thing to do here is I'm just going to put a paragraph tag. I'm going to give it an ID of cache, right? And then I'm going to say this works offline. Actually, I'm going to put an exclamation point because it's important. And I can come back to my demo.js, and inside this, I could do another test. So I could say if the browser doesn't support, so modernizer dot application cache, and I could come in here, and then I could find, I believe I called it cache, right? I could just hide that. So if we go ahead and build this, I'm going to launch it again. I went ahead and started the development server again. All right. You can see I don't see anything here, but if I come back here and refresh this page, There we go. I had to press Control F5 because I did cache the main page. This main page was one of the first pages. So you can see here that I have the text here that says, this works offline. So I can do that same kind of thing where I can down-level support different browsers. I can kind of hide functionality. You know, if I just was always visit this website in a browser that didn't support cache manifest, I'd never know that it couldn't work. And then I'm then notified that it would work. Okay, so the next thing. So I come through here on this website, so I'm going to go to the Network tab. And I'm going to go ahead and click Start Capture, and I'm going to hit this site. Okay. You can see here that I've got a lot of stuff being requested, right? So this becomes very important, especially in older browsers. Older browsers had a request limit, so you could only issue so many requests to the server. I think it was 2. Actually, I have a question, so let's go ahead and see that. Okay, so are there any plans for IE to support cache in the future? Yes. IE 10 supports it. IE 9 just does not. Obviously, we're probably not going to go back and patch IE 9, but IE 10 will support it. Actually, IE 10 is one of the best browsers that I've found for supporting the HTML5 spec to this spec. A lot of browsers have things, but they don't actually support them exactly to the spec. When is HTML, another question, when is HTML6 coming out? Sometime in the future, I would say. HTML5 hasn't even been ratified, so the working group is still doing a lot of work on it. If I remember correctly, there has been a segment or a working group created for the next version of HTML, but I wouldn't expect that until quite some time from now. Next question, cache will be supported in IE 10 Metro, desktop, or both? To be honest, I'm not 100% sure on that question. What you could do is try it out, but I will have my contact information at the end, and if you want to go ahead and send me a message, I can actually go ahead and figure that answer out for you and maybe either play around with it or even ask the appropriate folks, but I'm not sure on that. Sorry that I could not just answer that. Okay, so hopefully that's the questions for now. Okay, so I have this website. So I have a lot of requests, and one of the most common things to do is that you want to bundle these requests together, right? So because it's non-blocking, right? Actually, when you look at things like CSS and JavaScript, pulling them down, actually this most significant amount of time spent is actually the network call going to the server and coming back. It's not actually the actual transmission of a file, so you could add more contents without really hurting. It's easier to do one big file than multiple little ones. So we have another question. IE 9 does not support rounded corner styles, so need to wait for it. Yes. Actually, I think IE 9 supports it. I think IE 9 supports border radius, but I'm not positive. Actually, I think you might be right. Yes, so if IE 9 doesn't support it, but like I said, with Modernizer, you could use that kind of test. There's a value that you could actually check for whether it supports rounded corners, and then you could use one of the fallback libraries that we've been using for years to create rounded corners, whether it be the images cheat, or there's plenty of other JavaScript libraries that kind of dynamically create the images for you. So you could use one of those as well. Okay. So we want to go ahead and reduce the amount of requests here that we have on the page, just so it makes our site a little bit faster. Okay. So luckily there's a NuGet package for that. So if I go into manage NuGet packages, I already got it installed. There's this Microsoft.web.optimization. Now this is a package that we have released. We released several versions. I'm currently running the beta version just because this is the newest and latest and greatest. So it's beta software, so if it breaks, it's totally not my fault. Okay, so what this package has is it has built-in support for bundling and minification. So bundling means that you group all the files together. You take 6 files and make them into one. Minification is that then you take that and shorten that code down into smaller bits, right? So you change variable names to, instead of, you know, my really long variable name, change it to A, and then the next one to B, and kind of shorten everything up, put it on one line. So that's bundling and minification. So the web optimization package, we have some built-in logic already in there. So we understand that jQuery probably needs to be one of the first things that you're included. So jQuery needs to come first before jQuery UI, those types of things. That's important because when you combine the files, JavaScript executes from the top to the bottom. You need to have that kind of ordering built into the file already. So the first thing I'm going to do is the easiest and simplest of them all. Just let me close some windows here. And I'm just going to enable the default bundles. So if I go to global ASX here, let me actually, yeah, okay. I'm going to go to the global file here, and just underneath here is I'm going to say bundle table, control dot. I'm going to add the namespace dot bundles dot enable default bundles. Okay, so I've installed the NuGet package. I've added this one piece of code, and I'm just going to come back to this website, and I'm going to go to scripts/js. Okay, so you can see here, all of a sudden I'm now getting, basically, if you knew my JavaScript, you'd understand that this is one giant file that's been combined. All the stuff has been combined together into this one file, and then it's also been run through the minifier. So I want to take the time to point out, a lot of people say, hey, why are the comments still here? If you minify it, why are the comments still here? Well, this is a good example of when we minify, if there's already a .min file included in the project, so in this case I already have a jQuery.min file. If that min file is included, we will choose that first, and then we will not minify it. So in case we, for whatever reason, were to kind of throw up or not understand what you were trying to do in your code, you can minify it yourself and include it, and you could still get the benefits of bundling, but not have to worry about us constantly throwing on your minify action. So what this /js is it's kind of a default. So you go into a folder and then you say /js, and it will bundle up all the JavaScript and return it to you inside that folder. This also works with CSS, so I could go to content/CSS. I'm going to get all my stuff bundled up and included right there. By default, we don't recurse folders. This is only the top level CSS, but you can see how it's minified. You saw my style sheet earlier, and now it's minified. So it's all together into one line. A little less readable, but it's a lot less space, a lot less stuff to send down to the wire. Okay, so that's the default bundles, but maybe I wanted to create my own custom bundle, right? So maybe I had my own thing that I wanted to do. So I'm just going to remove the default bundles because I don't need those anymore. I'm going to grab this custom bundle. Okay, let me just format this a little bit nicer for you guys. Okay, so what do I have here? I'm creating a custom bundle, and this is going to be a style bundle. So there's two different types that we ship with. We ship with a style and a script bundle. Styles for style sheets, scripts for JavaScript. What I do is I say this is the URL that I want you to respond to. So if I make a request to /bundle, I want you to return me this bundled and minified code. And then I just call .include, and it takes, I can take in all the files that I want to include. In this particular case, I'm including all the jQuery UI files. And then I'm just adding that bundle to the bundle table. So rather than save, and more importantly build, because I'm in the global ASX, I just go ahead and come back here. I can go to ~bundle. And you can see here now, I've got all my styles for the jQuery UI style sheets combined into one request. Okay. So instead of having to include each one of these individually, I can include just this one. And what having a custom bundle allows you to do is maybe define, I have one for styles, so maybe I'm not using jQuery UI on each page, so I only want to have, I want to include this bundle only when I need it on the page. Or perhaps maybe we don't understand some custom ordering that you need to have, right? So maybe you need to have, you know, your company has, they do a weird ordering. So by default, then we just do them in order that they appear in the file system. So, you know, A through Z. So maybe your company requires Z through A to be included. So you can control the ordering this way. So we do have a couple more questions. Let me jump over here. Is the bundling feature smart enough to check whether the current page using the JavaScript? If not, how can we manage to optimize page performance? Okay, yeah, so it doesn't really do anything fancy. It just bundles everything up and sends it down. Just like you would create a static file. You previously would just do this with a static file. You'd copy all this stuff into a static file and just add this one static file. So the bundling doesn't do it, but what it does allow it to do is if you send down all this file, all these files, this /bundle is then cached by your browser. So if I request it the next time, I'm not requesting it again. So I know it seems kind of like a lot to bundle everything and then just send down one. Even though I might not be using all of it, it would be cached, so then it's just used the same across all the pages. So hopefully that kind of answers your question, but if you were concerned about that, you could do these custom bundles and break it up a little bit more. So you could break it up and say I have this page, and this page bundle, and you could create your own bundle if you really wanted to per page. So hopefully that answers your question. If not, feel free to ask it again or clarify. Okay, so I got this, and you know how you would include this is you would just come to your script references. So if I go to my layout page here, so I've got a link here to source. So if I wanted to include it, I would just include it by doing ~bundle, right? So pretty simple. Something I'm not going to just take the time to show you is there is an API for actually grabbing a hash. So you can request the bundle / a hash. And then if it changes, that hash will be updated so you can serve a new one, so you could cache that for a really long time. I think all questions answered. Okay. So that is bundling and minification. That was kind of a really quick overview of how you can bundle and minify things together. But I want to take this one step further, right? I want to show you guys some cooler stuff that you could do. So bundling and minification, I actually want to add support for less. And less is basically a way of writing CSS with variables, let's say. So the first thing I need to do is I need to come and manage my NuGet packages. And this one I don't think I had installed already. I'm going to call it .less. I'm going to search for that. So I'm going to go ahead and install this package. And this is just a library that allows me to parse less files. So I've installed that with NuGet. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a class here. And I'm going to call this class less support. This is where I'm going to add all the stuff I need to support less. And copy that. And I'm going to have to add a few references here. And okay, so that should be everything. So what am I doing here? Well, the first thing I'm doing is, so if you remember, I had script bundles and style bundles. I want to actually create a less bundle. So I'm extending the bundle class, and really the only thing I need to do is call my base, right? So I'm saying this is the virtual path that I want you to answer to. So this was the /bundle in the last example. And then I want to run a transform on that bundle. So I want you to minify it before. So I'm going to minify each file, and then I'm going to bundle it together, right? So you can write as many of these transforms as you wanted, however you would like to do that. In this particular case, I have created my own called less minify. It inherits from the CSS minify because less is just a way for me to group all, to kind of add variables to styles. So it's eventually going to get down to a style sheet. So then I want the style sheet to do the minification. And basically, I'm just going to override the process method that says, okay, I'm going to do the I'm going to run the less parser on the content first, which just means that it's going to transform less into CSS, and then I'm going to pass that to the base minifier. Right? So that's pretty simple. And then the last thing I need to do is create a less file, obviously. So I'm going to add a new item. I'm going to say style sheet, and I'm going to call this demo.less. Okay, and I have some examples of some less. Right, so you can see here where I'm defining a variable, which is the red color, and then I'm using it throughout the website. So I'm kind of defining variables. Okay, so then the last thing I need to do here is I probably need to create my own bundle. So I'm going to say var less is equal to the new less bundle. Now I want to, when I request /less, I want you to respond to that, and I'm going to say dot include, and in that particular case I'm going to include, I believe it's just / demo dot less. Okay. And then I'm going to say bundle table dot bundles dot add this. Right. So I'm just going to get rid of this custom bundle just to clean some stuff up here. I'm going to build the page. Okay, so I'm going to come back to Chrome and I'm going to request less. And there we go. Sorry, it was cached for a second. So this is the less, and you can see that I'll have it on one line now, so it's been minified, but you can also see where I had the variables that they have been replaced. So that's a really quick and easy way that you could go ahead and add less support to your site as well. Another question. So does bundle allow selecting files using wildcards? Yes, and you can just add an entire directory. You can actually just say, grab my scripts directory. So you don't actually have to include each file. I just wanted to show you that you could control the ordering that way. Somebody is recommending a plugin for less. Yes, there is plenty of plugins already that exist for less. I just wanted to show you that the bundler and minifier could be extended to support less as well. Since the whole theme of this was also, reducing, making the markup smaller and simpler, I just kind of wanted to show you that. Kind of a cool little fun thing that we could have added. Okay, so is bundling available in MVC3? Bradley, thank you for asking that question, because that segues perfectly into the second part of my talk. So nothing that we have done here up until this point is specific to any of the new technologies. So it's not really specific to MVC4 or Web Forms 4.5 or 4.0. So with bundling, we originally started it out as being part of the 4.5 effort. It would actually require 4.5, so it would require MVC4, Web Forms 4.5, or Web Pages 2. We actually started it out that way, and then once we were kind of working on it and realized, hey, it doesn't take a dependency on any of these things, we could actually take all of this and put it into 4.0. So we actually pulled that back out. We took out all the dependencies that we had because they weren't really dependencies. It was just the fact that we had created it that way. Created a NuGet package and decided to ship it out of band. So this kind of ties in with the whole theme of this, which is 4.0 and 4.5. So the 4.5 stuff is really just extra sugar on top of it. And I'm going to show you here in the last about 5 minutes some of the nice sugar things that we've added on top. But you could have always done HTML5, CSS3, and JavaScript. We've just taken in the new versions of everything and made it a little bit easier for you. So then the last question is does the CSS editor support last syntax? Currently it does not. That's also a perfect segue for one of the last points that I wanted to make. Is in the next versions, vNext of everything. So all the new stuff that we have released. Which includes MVC4 and Visual Studio 2010 or 2012, which you have seen me been using. In 2012, the the web team, our team, has done a lot of work to actually pull the editor components out of band. And what I mean by that is we ship with Visual Studio, but we wanted to be able to update those as frequently as we wanted to. And we've done a lot of work around that, so that really kind of enables support for maybe we want to come in and write a less syntax support later on. I'm not promising less syntax support. It's definitely one of the most requested things, but it was just a good segue into saying that we're kind of pulling these things out of band and allowing for us to update it more than every time Visual Studio is updated. So, and then one more question, and then I'm going to take this last question, and then I want to go ahead and move on and show you some of the last stuff before we run out of time. Do we have any special application to validate CSS3? Yes, we have a very special application to validate CSS3, which is called Visual Studio 2012. In 2012, we have support for that, and I'll show you that in just a minute. But also, there is a W3C validator. It's jigsaw.w3.org. Jigsaw is the validator for the CSS, just like there's an HTML validator as well. So there you go. Okay, so I'm going to do File New Project, and I'm just going to select a Web Forms application. So if you notice down here in the bottom corner, stuff in the status bar, things are being added. So one of the things that we've done with 4.5 templates is said we want to include a bunch of NuGet packages that you're going to probably already use, and those include things like jQuery and Modernizer. So these templates are already set up, so you don't have to go through all that stuff that we talked about. You don't have to worry about document.create. We've already included Modernizer out of the box, so we can use the HTML5 components like this section and the H group here without having to worry about the site breaking and backwards compatibility. And we've worked really hard to actually, if I go ahead and run this, if we take a look at this site in IE, it's being very slow today, probably because I'm trying to record and run a live meeting at the same time. Once this pops up here, which apparently will take a little bit, so we'll talk a little. We'll come back to that. So you can see here we have a doc type. So we have HTML5 doc type validation as well. So if I come to the site.master, one of the cool features we have here is I'm going to delete this doc type and I'm going to change it to HTML4S. So it's just a snippet for HTML4 strict. You can actually see that the doc type changed. So in Visual Studio 2010, SP1, we always had support to validate against XHTML5 and HTML5, but you actually had to physically come up here and change this validation box yourself. That was kind of something that we realized was a pain point because, hey, we're already parsing the document to understand what your doc type is. Why didn't we change the validation type? So now if I just change this back, you'll notice that this eventually, once the document refreshes here in just a minute, it will actually change back to HTML5. There we go. And if I was to put an XML namespace on the HTML tag, it would change to XHTML5. So you can see, let me see if I can get this. Okay. So you can see here, if I come in here and I render this in IE7 mode, which IE decided that it was going to be very slow now. But you can see the site looks the same in IE9 and in IE7. So we've done a lot of work to get the backwards compatibility working in 4.5 as well. And I promised the last thing that I would show. So you can see here that we've really embraced all of the kind of things that we have been preaching in our templates as well. And we've made things a little bit easier for you. So things like adding bundling. So bundles are included by default, just because we know that's best practice. And then, like always, we have all the default support. So if I come down here, just clear this out, we've added the appropriate support for input, or I'm going to do ASP text box, right? I'm going to say text mode equals. So we've added all the appropriate types in the text box that we needed. Right? So then we also have, we've taken that also to file upload. We now allow multiples. So in HTML5, there's a part of the spec defines that a file upload can actually upload more than one file, so you don't have to have the add another file. You can have the click and select many upload files. And we have all the appropriate APIs, so the backend has file, has files, posted file, posted files. We have all the appropriate APIs, so we've gone through and updated all of that as well. Okay, and then also I just said that I would cover this. So in CSS3, you can actually change the validation for this. So you can see I'm validating against, let me see if I can find anything here. Actually, at the very bottom. So these templates use media selectors by default. This is a CSS only 3 only, so you can see here we're not getting any green squigglies. We're validating against CSS3, and you can change that in your settings. Right? So that's kind of, like I said, you've always been able to write HTML5, so hopefully you can take this, and I've shown you, why it's important, and you could take this, the lessons that you've learned from this talk, and then immediately go start using them. You don't need to wait for the next version or for your company to support the next version of ASP.NET, because we know that's going to take a while. But if you are able to use the next version of ASP.NET, we've done a lot of things to help make your life easier and better. So that's the demo. The last slide here is my contact information. So I'm OsborneM pretty much on everything. So osbornem.com, twitter.com/osbornem, a bunch of stuff. So I'd like to open it up. We've got about 10 minutes before the keynote. So if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer any more questions. Once again, thank you for coming and attending aspConf, and a big round of applause to all the people that helped put aspConf together.